6 weeks before the due date of the baby my husband and I had spent 4 years trying to have, our surrogate, my closest friend since college, called and told me she decided she was keeping him. My name is Bridget, and I want you to understand that this wasn't a legal ambiguity or a contract loophole. This was a decision, delivered over the phone, by the person I trusted more than almost anyone else on earth, 6 weeks before I was supposed to become a mother for the first time. This story does not slow down. Stay with me. Fast context, because the pace only accelerates from here. My husband Callum and I had struggled with infertility for 4 years, 3 rounds of IVF, 2 devastating miscarriages, a diagnosis that eventually made clear my own body simply wasn't going to be able to carry a pregnancy to term. It was, without question, the hardest stretch of our entire marriage, and I want to tell you that when my best friend Louisa, a woman I'd known since we were 19 years old, roommates in college, the person who stood beside me at my own wedding, offered, unprompted, to be our gestational surrogate, I cried harder than I had at any single point during the preceding 4 years of grief. It felt, genuinely, like the first unambiguously good thing to happen to us in that entire exhausting stretch. I want to be precise about the medical and legal details here, because they matter enormously to what happened later. This was a gestational surrogacy. The embryo was created using my egg and Callum's sperm, meaning Louisa had zero genetic relationship to the baby she was carrying. We went through the full legal process, a surrogacy attorney, a formal contract, independent legal counsel for Louisa specifically to make sure her interests were separately represented, everything done exactly the way you're supposed to do it, everything documented, everything, as far as we understood at the time, completely airtight. The pregnancy itself, for the first 7 months, was, by every outward measure, going beautifully. Louisa was healthy, the baby was healthy, and I want to tell you that those months were, despite everything, some of the happiest of my entire adult life. Attending appointments together, watching the ultrasounds, picking out a nursery color with an optimism I hadn't let myself feel in years. 6 weeks before the due date, on an ordinary Thursday evening, Louisa called me. I remember answering cheerfully, expecting an update on a routine checkup she'd had that afternoon, and I want to describe the exact tone of her voice when she started talking, because it was different immediately, careful in a way that put me on alert before she'd said anything substantive at all. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. "And I don't really know how to say this in a way that doesn't sound insane, so I'm just going to say it. I don't think I can go through with giving him up." I sat down hard on my own kitchen floor. The same specific, involuntary physical response I've since learned seems to be almost universal in these moments. Some instinct toward literally kneading the ground beneath you the moment your entire understood future rearranges itself in real time. "What does that mean?" I said, though some sick, immediate part of me already understood exactly what it meant. "I mean, I've been feeling him move for 7 months, she said, her voice breaking. "I've talked to him every single day. I don't know how to explain this in a way that doesn't sound like a betrayal, because I know it is one, but I don't think I can hand him over and just go back to my regular life like nothing happened. I think I'm keeping him." I want to walk you through the next several hours, because they moved fast, and it did not stop escalating for a single minute of it. I called Callum immediately, and he came home from work within 20 minutes. And I want to tell you that watching my husband's face as I explained what Louisa had just told me is an image I don't think I'll ever fully lose. The specific collapse of 4 years of hope and preparation happening in real time across someone's expression. We called our surrogacy attorney that same night, despite the late hour, because we needed, immediately, to understand exactly what legal standing we had. What she told us was, in some ways, reassuring, and in other ways, genuinely terrifying in its own right. Our contract was, in fact, legally solid. Gestational surrogacy agreements in our state are enforceable specifically because there's no genetic relationship between the surrogate and the child, meaning Louisa had no legal parental claim regardless of how she felt emotionally about the pregnancy. The baby was, legally, unambiguously ours from the moment of birth, contract and pre-birth parentage order already filed and approved by a judge months earlier, exactly the way it's supposed to work. But legal standing and lived reality, I learned very quickly, are two entirely different things when the person carrying your child 6 weeks from delivery has decided, emotionally, that she does not want to let him go. I called Louisa back that same night, and what followed was one of the most disorienting, escalating conversations of my entire life. "I know legally he's yours," she said, crying. "I know that. I'm not trying to fight the contract. I don't know how I'm supposed to hand him to you in 6 weeks, and then just go back to being your friend who happened to carry him. I don't think I can do that. I think I need to talk to you about maybe, I don't know, some kind of open arrangement, where I'm still part of his life somehow, in a real way, not just as the surrogate." I want to describe the specific, layered fear that hit me in that moment, because it wasn't simply about losing the baby. The attorney had made clear, repeatedly, that legally, that outcome was extremely unlikely regardless of how Louisa felt. It was about something else entirely, the terrifying uncertainty of not knowing what Louisa might actually do in the 6 weeks between that phone call and the actual birth. Surrogates in genuine emotional crisis. Our attorney told us gently but directly, have, in rare but real cases, made impulsive, harmful decisions in the final weeks of pregnancy, leaving the state, refusing further prenatal care coordination, in the most extreme cases attempting to simply disappear before delivery. She wasn't telling us this to frighten us unnecessarily, she said, but because we needed to understand the full range of what we might be dealing with, and to take it seriously enough to act quickly. I want to tell you what the following 6 weeks actually looked like, because they were, without exaggeration, some of the most surreal and frightening weeks of my entire life, running on a parallel track of legal maneuvering and increasingly careful, delicate emotional management with my closest friend simultaneously. We didn't cut Louisa off. Our attorney was clear that doing so could actually increase the risk of the exact worst-case scenarios we were worried about, that maintaining a warm, supportive relationship with her through the remainder of the pregnancy was, paradoxically, our best protection against her making an impulsive decision out of feeling isolated or attacked. So I kept showing up. I went to her remaining prenatal appointments. I texted her every day, the way I had for the entire pregnancy, holding an almost unbearable duality the entire time. Genuine, real love and support for my closest friend, layered directly on top of a specific, constant, low-grade terror that she might, at any point over the following 6 weeks, take an action that would upend everything. I learned, over the following 2 weeks, more about what was actually driving Louisa's sudden crisis. And I want to be honest that it reframed the situation in a way that made it more understandable, even while it didn't make it any less frightening to navigate. Louisa had, it turned out, gone through her own miscarriage roughly 18 months before agreeing to be our surrogate, a loss she'd never fully processed, one that had, over the course of carrying our baby for 7 months, apparently surfaced in ways neither she nor we had anticipated when we started this process. Carrying a pregnancy to full term, feeling a baby move every day for months, had, in her own words during a long, difficult conversation about 3 weeks before the due date, brought back everything I never actually grieved properly the first time, and I think some part of me started treating this baby like a chance to finally get to keep one. I want to be clear that understanding the why behind her crisis didn't change the legal reality, and it didn't change the fact that Callum and I spent 6 weeks in a state of genuine, sustained fear about whether we would actually get to bring our son home. But it did help me hold some compassion for her alongside the fear, which I think, looking back, was important for how the situation ultimately resolved. Our attorney recommended, about 4 weeks before the due date, that we bring in a mediator with specific experience in surrogacy emotional crises. Not a legal mediator, but someone trained specifically in helping surrogates process exactly this kind of late pregnancy attachment crisis, a more common phenomenon, apparently, than I'd ever had any reason to know about before living through it myself. Louisa agreed to the sessions, and I want to tell you that watching her, over the following 3 weeks, slowly work through the layered grief of her own earlier loss, separated, gradually, from her feelings about our baby specifically, was its own strange, difficult, and ultimately hopeful process to witness from the outside. I want to describe the day of the birth itself, because it was, unsurprisingly, one of the most emotionally complicated days of my entire life. Louisa went into labor 4 days before her scheduled induction date, and Callum and I were there, in the delivery room, exactly as we'd always planned to be. I want to tell you honestly that in the final hour before our son was born, I still did not know, with complete certainty, how Louisa would feel in the moment he actually arrived. Whether the weeks of mediation and processing had genuinely resolved enough of what had surfaced for her, or whether the raw, physical reality of delivery would reignite everything all over again. What actually happened, when he was born, was something I don't think I could have predicted with any confidence going in. Louisa held him for a few minutes, immediately after delivery, something we'd agreed to, on the mediator's recommendation, as an important part of her being able to process a clean, intentional goodbye rather than an abrupt separation. And then, crying, she handed him to me directly and said something I don't think I'll ever forget. "He's yours. He was always yours." I think I just needed to actually say goodbye to him properly this time, instead of the way I never got to the first time. I want to be honest that our relationship with Louisa, in the 2 years since, has not fully returned to what it was before all of this happened, and I don't think it ever fully will, though we have, remarkably, remained close. She is, formally, part of our son's life, an honorary aunt of sorts, someone he knows and loves, though the specific, uncomplicated ease of our friendship before the surrogacy has been replaced by something more careful, more consciously maintained, built on top of it. Experience neither of us will ever be able to fully set down. I started therapy about a month after our son was born, once the acute crisis of those 6 weeks had fully passed, and there was finally room to process what we'd actually lived through. My therapist has helped me understand that the specific terror of that period, genuine, sustained fear about whether we would get to keep our own biological child, despite an ironclad legal contract, is its own particular category of trauma, one that doesn't fully resolve just because the legal outcome ultimately went the way it was always supposed to. The fear itself was real and valid, regardless of how things eventually turned out, and I've had to give myself permission to actually grieve those 6 weeks rather than dismiss them simply because the ending was, ultimately, the one we'd hoped for the entire time. I think, more than anything, about that ordinary Thursday evening phone call, and how completely, instantly, 6 weeks of genuine terror can be triggered by a single sentence from someone you trust more than almost anyone else on earth. I think about how close, in some very real sense, we came to a genuinely different and much harder outcome, not because the law would have allowed it, but because grief, when it surfaces unexpectedly in someone carrying your child, doesn't always respect what the paperwork says, and I understand now, in a way I never had to understand before living through it, that the emotional reality of surrogacy carries risks that no contract, however airtight, can fully protect you from on its own. It's been just over 2 years now. My mother said something to me a few months after our son was born that I still think about often. She said, "You didn't get lucky, Bridget. You did the work, showing up for her every single day of those 6 weeks, holding both fear and love at the same time, without letting either one collapse the other. That's not luck. That's how you actually got him home." I've thought about that a lot since. I think it's the truest thing anyone said to me during that entire period, and I think it's the thing that's helped me hold both parts of this story at once. Genuine gratitude for how it ultimately resolved, and honest acknowledgement of exactly how frightening those 6 weeks actually were while we were living inside them. If you've ever had to hold on to a hope while genuinely, legitimately fearing you might lose it, watching someone you love work through a crisis that could have cost you everything, I want to hear about it. I think there's something important about naming how frightening these situations can be even when the legal or practical framework is, technically, on your side, because the fear itself is real regardless of how the story ultimately ends. 6 weeks. One phone call. That's all it took to learn exactly how much I was capable of holding. Fear and love, simultaneously, for as long as it took to bring my son home.